into politics and the pulpit here on your hometown station. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, as we view the world through the lens of God's infallible Word. Quick shameless plug here at the top of the hour. If you want to hear Freedom's Way Baptist Church and yours truly on radio, you can tune in to KHTS each Sunday at 8 a.m. for the Faith and Freedom Hour. If you'd like to visit our church, check us out online at freedomswaybaptistchurch.org. That's freedomswaybaptistchurch.org. If what is happening in Israel has your interest piqued, then you will want to listen to the show next Wednesday as we interview Dr. Bill Grady, who authored the book Holy Ground, An Exhaustive History of the Nation of Israel. Dr. Bill Grady will also be speaking at Freedom's Way Baptist Church on Sunday, January 28th, during all three of our services, which again you can find online at freedomswaybaptistchurch.org. And he will have his many books available, including Holy Ground, for purchase on that Sunday. But today, we have two things that we need to accomplish. In fact, it might be more than two things, but two primary things we need to accomplish. First of all, the historic Trump win just a little over 48 hours ago during the Iowa caucuses. And secondly, should a Christian be supporting Trump? And if not, then who should a Christian be supporting? First of all, I just want to get it out of the way. Trump won in Iowa. He just didn't win. He won big. He won decisively. And he won just about all the demographics. He not only won, but he won the largest margin in Iowa caucus history. If anything, Trump's win in Iowa was a double-barrel middle finger to the establishment media that has been saying nothing but negative stuff towards the former president literally for the last 8 years. Really, to be honest with you, since the day in 2015 when he came down that elevator. Not only did Trump win Iowa, but he won 98 of its 99 counties and only lost one single county by one single vote. Now, if we contrast that to Governor DeSantis, who literally moved to Iowa and spent the last year there, literally millions of dollars hand over fist, he didn't have a single county to show for on Monday night. And Haley, of course, kind of had some wind in her sails here in the last couple of weeks. She actually did win one county, and as I said, by just one single vote. Now, the media, which clearly has egg on its face again, kept saying that DeSantis and Haley would keep Trump under 50% and would prevent the former president from claiming that 50% of caucus goers supported him. And you know that the media was really wanting the former president to be under 50%. Well, as we all know, that fell apart Monday night as Trump won just over 51% of the total vote. Now, let me just say that I just recently read an article on Red State. I won't mention the author's name, but he was saying that, now that you know it's a he was saying that, well, the participation rate was down because of, various things. And of course, I think probably the major thing was the weather, considering it was 35 degrees below zero. And it was just horrible, horrible weather. But this article went on to say that it was down appreciably from 2000. Well, all I can tell you is this. Trump won 51% of the total vote. And if this was Haley or if this was DeSantis, none of those stories would even be printed. Why? Because, well, somehow, some way, even on the leftist side and even on the right, they've got to somehow diminish the victory of the former president. But the fact is, if you look at all the crosstabs, Fox News and CNN did some pretty good analysis here. Yes, you heard me say that right. CNN actually did some good analysis, but I'm going to hit them in a little bit. Trump literally won across the board. He won with non-college graduates. He won with women. I know that's odd because obviously that was Haley's strong suit, and supposedly all women do not like the former president, but he won with women. He won with strong evangelicals, which, by the way, makes up a huge part of the Iowa electorate. Bob Vanderplatte, I think his name was, one of the big evangelical leaders there in Iowa, made a big deal a few weeks ago of endorsing Governor DeSantis and saying that, don't worry about the polls showing Trump 30 points ahead of DeSantis and Haley. DeSantis is going to come out on top. Well, obviously that didn't happen. The polls were right. Also, Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, a very popular governor, by the way, endorsed Governor DeSantis, and that still didn't move the needle at all for Governor DeSantis. And when I say Trump won big with strong evangelicals, you have to understand that this win was a huge turnaround from Trump's second place showing in Iowa way back in 2016, where, if you all remember, Ted Cruz came in first, Trump came in second, and then a very close third was Senator Marco Rubio. In 2016, and I can understand this, in 2016, evangelical Christians doubted Trump's conservative bona fides. And listen, I was one of them. I think it's important to note that Trump wasn't my first or my second or even my third choice in 2016. I was on the Ted Cruz train. I was on cruise control. He was the big conservative standard bearer in 2015 and 2016. He was the lightning rod senator from Texas, and he was the big thing that everybody wanted. And frankly, I still like Ted Cruz because just today, if I'm not mistaken, Ted Cruz just endorsed former President Trump. But in 2016, the majority of evangelical Christians doubted Trump's conservative bona fides. And why not? All we knew about former President Trump at the time was the fact that he was a rich billionaire, that he was brash, that he was not very humble, and that he made cameo appearances in Home Alone and a few other things. But Monday night, Trump won evangelicals, and it wasn't even close. Now, you would think all this winning by former President Trump would humble the mainstream media, who has made it their entire life's purpose to utterly destroy the former president in any way that they possibly can. Whether it's through lies or through half lies, it doesn't matter. They're going to do their best that they can. But you'd think that him getting 51% of the vote of the entire caucus would humble them. But continue holding your breath. CNN and MSNBC both doubled down on their Trump derangement syndrome. Yes, I truly believe there is something called Trump derangement syndrome. I want you to listen to these two clips. They're both from Rachel Maddow, who, by the way, there's such irony in what she says here, and we'll pick up on that irony on the other side of these clips.
The big picture takeaway from that, and I don't mean to be, again, too dark, as you said, on this, but it is not if we are worried about the rise of authoritarianism in this country, we are worried about potential rise of fascism in this country, if we're worried about our democracy falling to an authoritarian and potentially fascist form of government, the leader who is trying to do that is part of that equation. But people wanting that is a much bigger part of that equation. And the American electorate is made up of two major parties. One of those parties has been flirting with extremism on the ultra-right for a very long time. They've brought them in a way that they haven't been central to Republican electoral politics ever before, and I know because I've been studying this. But once you have radicalized one major party so that those are the preferences of the people who adhere to your party, the leader's interchangeable. And yes, Trumpism is sometimes what we call it. MAGA movement is probably a better way to do it. But there is an authoritarian movement inside Republican politics that isn't being bamboozled by Trump. They are pushing Trump to get more and more extreme, because the more extreme things he says, the more they adhere to him. And that is coming from a very large proportion of the American right that adheres to the Republican Party. And that's why this is a Republican Party problem more than it is the problem of one man and his leader.
Doesn't that tie together the...
Do you hear that? Rachel Madcow is saying that there is an authoritarian push within the Republican Party to somehow make Trump more, quote, authoritarian. Folks, first of all, it's so rich when the left says that the right is authoritarian, when all the authoritarian stuff that is happening is coming through the left and not the right. Listen, it's not the Republican Party trying to get Biden kicked off of the, off the ballot. It's not the Republicans trying to imprison, Biden's main competitor for the presidency. It's not the Republican Party that's weaponizing the Department of Justice or the FBI. It's not the Republican Party doing any of those things. It's the party that's currently in power that is doing those things. And by the way, if you think that stuff is scary already, just wait until Trump is the actual crowned nominee. The rhetoric is going to go through the roof. And what's funny about Monday night is if you saw Trump's victory speech, you'll notice that his tone tended to be a bit more conciliatory. In fact, he sounded, his tone was softer. He seemed less bombastic than what Trump usually is. And he even threw out some fig leaves there to Governor DeSantis and former Governor Nikki Haley by not referring to them by their given nicknames, but by referring to them by their first names, Ron and Nikki. It sounded like to me he wanted to strike a different tone. Even in light of that very different conciliatory tone, I want you to listen now to CNN's Jake Tapper, who began talking over the former president as Trump started talking about illegal immigration. Cut to.
Interject. I'm sorry, I just have to do a little bit of business just for a second. At this point in the evening, the projected winner of the Iowa caucuses has just started giving his victory speech. We will keep an eye on that as it happens. We will let you know if there's any news made in that speech, if there's anything noteworthy, something substantive and important. The reason I'm saying this is, of course, there is a reason that we and other news organizations have generally stopped giving an unfiltered live platform to remarks by former President Trump. It is not out of spite. It is not a decision that we relish. It is a decision that we regularly revisit. And honestly, earnestly, it is not an easy decision, but there is a cost to us as a news organization of knowingly broadcasting untrue things. That is a fundamental truth of our business and who we are. And so his remarks tonight will not air here live. We will monitor them.
Obviously, that was Rachel Maddow from MSNBC and not Jake Tapper. I don't think I've got Jake Tapper's cut right here. I'll talk about that in just a second. But think about the absolute lack of self-awareness when you hear Rachel Maddow bloviating about misinformation and not even allowing their own listeners and watchers on MSNBC to actually hear the speech of the man who made history on Monday night, having won the largest margin in Iowa caucus history. This from a woman who peddled the Russia hoax conspiracy. This from a woman that every time, I think she's a woman, every time something came down the theological pike or the political pike, she was one of the first ones on MSNBC to jump on it. And all of that has left egg on her face, but these folks are not at all self-aware of their own issues. These folks do not even care. I was talking a minute ago about Jake Tapper cutting away from Trump's speech as soon as Trump began talking about illegal immigration. And this is interesting because the number one issue for voters in Iowa was not the economy. That was the number two issue for the voters in Iowa. The number one issue for the voters in Iowa was immigration and the fact that we have open borders. And yet, here we have the presumptive nominee speaking about illegal immigration at his victory speech, which was the number one issue in Iowa for voters, and yet Jake Tapper says, "Oh, I'm going to have to cut into this here. Here's the former president," quote, striking a conciliatory tone. At least Tapper recognized that, and then began saying that he's starting his anti-illegal immigration rhetoric. Words to that effect. You could see it on YouTube, folks, or catch it on Town Hall or Right Scoop or whatever sites you like to look at. But the fact is, folks, here you have media in the United States of America that supposedly promotes and heralds free speech and freedom of the press, actually censoring what you are hearing from the presumptive nominee of the party and from the former president of the United States of America. That happens in like third world countries with a bunch of dictators. Who exactly is the authoritarian here, folks? On the other side of the break, I want to answer the question that most of you maybe would like to know. Should Christians vote for Trump? And I want to explain a kind of establishment within modern Christianity that lost its ever-loving mind when Trump won back in 2016. When we return here on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station. All right, we're back here live on Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, Pastor Jerry Cook. Real quick shout out here to a young man in our church who just the other day was in would have been a tragic motorcycle wreck. Went to the hospital, looked like things were not great, but thankfully, young man, healthy kid, and it looks like he's bouncing back. And so we praise the Lord for that. He had a bunch of tubes down his throat yesterday, and it looked really bad. But he has made a good turn. So we praise the Lord for that. And I know some of you guys out there in the audience know a little bit about that. So we thank the Lord for his miracle. All right. Well, listen. At the top there, I asked this question. Should a Christian be voting for Trump? I've got some pastor friends and some Christians that are having some real reservations about voting for the former president, even though some of those pastors and some of those Christians voted for him twice already. Now, full disclosure, this Christian pastor voted for the former president twice. As I said in 2016, reluctantly, because again, I had no track record. I had no idea what he would do. To be honest with you, my entire thought going into 2016, November of that year, was that Hillary was going to trounce Trump. In fact, I still remember telling my wife, I'm going to have dinner and I'm just going to go off into the room here. You let me know how things are going. And frankly, I wasn't even monitoring the election until my wife and my mother-in-law walked in and said, "Hey, this thing is actually going pretty good." And then, of course, we all know what happened that night. That was the night that the establishment on both sides of the political aisles lost their ever-loving minds. And from that point, there was and again, I think I'm using the right word here, there was a plot to make sure that his entire first term was hampered, which he had astronomical headwinds that I don't think any other Republican president would have put up with or could have dealt with, to be frank, except for Donald J. Trump. So what I think I would like to do is, I think it's important that you know that within politics, that is within the two-party system, Republican and Democrat, that there is an establishment presence that exists in both of those political parties. I think it's fair to say that Nancy Pelosi is an establishment for the Democrats, and that Mitch McConnell is an establishment for the Republicans. Yes, there's more establishment representation in the Democrats. Yes, there's more establishment representations with the Republicans, but McConnell and Pelosi would be prime examples. But let's just define, for the sake of our discussion, let's define establishment. Establishment means this: a group in a society exercising power and influence over matters of policy and taste, and seen as resisting change. Remember the Resist Trump movement during 2017 and 2018. A lot of the Democrats were pushing this whole resistance thing. This was the establishment in both political parties exerting their influence and their aversion to change as brought about through Trump. And there were guys even on the Republican side. As I said, I doubted Trump's political bona fides. I had no idea what to expect. Guys like Mark Levin and, maybe not necessarily Rush Limbaugh, who was, of course, with us at the time. Rush was actually kind of cheerleading Trump, I'd say, about starting in May of 2016 when he finally clinched the nomination. Rush Limbaugh was on the Trump train. But there were a bunch of guys that just had a real tough time accepting Trump. Guys like Michael Medved, Hugh Hewitt, even Ben Shapiro. These guys were just having a tough time with Trump. And I would say that some of those guys that I just mentioned, not all of them, but some of them would be kind of part of the establishment, frankly. And so I think it's important for us to know that there is an establishment not only in the political parties, but there is also an establishment that exists within evangelical Christianity. And that is, there's a group of Christians who resist change and who exert power and influence over matters of taste and policy. And I think it's important for you to understand that establishment within modern evangelical Christianity is just as influential within Christianity as the Pelosi establishment and the McConnell establishment, respectively, are influential in their particular parties. The establishment within evangelicalism and the establishment within politics are allied with each other against all things Trump. Basically, Orange Man Bad is their mantra. That's their battle cry. Orange Man Bad. I posted about this today on Facebook, in fact. Men like Russell Moore, who was very instrumental within the Southern Baptist Convention just a couple years ago. Now he's, I think, editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. Men like David French, who is, I think he's the editor of the Dispatch, which has a bunch of disaffected, non-Trumpian guys on there, like Jonah Goldberg and others. They write for the Dispatch. And then you've got John Piper, the pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church up in the Michigan area. These are all Christian establishment leaders. And remember our definition of establishment: a group in a society exercising power and influence over matters of policy and taste and seen as resisting change. And by the way, men like David French, Russell Moore, John Piper, and others who in 2016 got together with the likes of David Brooks, David Frum, and other pseudo-conservatives, they got together to try to influence the electorate against Donald Trump. And they did this in a two-pronged way. They influenced the political establishment through the McConnells and the Pelosi's and the Paul Ryans and the others, and they also tried to influence the churches, and successfully so, by trying to somehow influence the electorate against Donald Trump. These men think that, quote, white Christian nationalism is America's greatest threat, and secular nut job Joy Reid of MSNBC completely agrees. I want you to listen to this clip from Joy Reid from MSNBC. I don't like to play Joy Reid very much, and we don't play Joy Reid very much because she is a racist. She is a racist race baiter. But here's what Joy Reid was saying, that the reason why Trump won his landslide victory in Iowa Monday was because of those dastardly white Christians. Clip 3.
But, I feel like the important sort of data point, and Steve talks about it a lot, he's going to probably talk about it a little more tonight, is that these are white Christians. That this is a state that is overrepresented by white Christians that are going to participate in these caucuses, yes. Especially tonight. Earlier today, reached out to Robbie Jones, from the Public Religion Research Institute, knowing that we were going to talk about Iowa. And this is a hyper-evangelical white state. And he said the following to me: Iowa is about 61% white Christian. The country as a whole is approximately 41% white Christian. And in Iowa, we're talking about evangelical white Christians. And he said the following, because I asked him, what do they get out of supporting Donald Trump? Because he keeps losing, he keeps delivering losses and losses and losses. And he said the following: they see themselves as the rightful inheritors of this country, and Trump has promised to give it back to them. All the things that we think about electability, about, what are people gaming out, or none of that matters when you believe that God has given you this country, that it is yours, and that everyone who is not a white conservative Christian is a fraudulent American, is a less real American. Then you don't care about electability. You care about what God has given.
Well, there's the racist race baiter Joy Reid on MSNBC, and thankfully at the very end there she was interrupted by a breaking news cryon there, and no, that was actually breaking news. They weren't trying to shut her up. But, I mean, if you want to know what the left's plan is going forward in this election, the plan is to actually attack Christians. It's going to be through words first, but then they're going to ratchet up those words and talk about just what a threat white Christians are, because we're, quote, nationalists. Now, if Joy Reid had done her homework, which of course she hasn't done her homework because she's a race baiter and because she probably believes in critical race theory and all that other bullcrap, she would realize that all of the founding fathers of our country, I would say 97% of them, were all white Protestant men, Christians. There was something in this country that was called the Protestant work ethic. That's a good thing. Maybe Joy should probably read our founding fathers in their own words, their biographies and their journals, and see how often they quoted the Lord Jesus Christ, or they quoted the Old Testament, or they quoted the Bible in general. The most quoted Old Testament book by the original founders was the book of Deuteronomy. If Joy Reid would simply just walk around Washington or walk around the Supreme Court or walk around some of the places of our nation, she would notice inscriptions from the Bible all over the place. But of course, Joy Reid, she's a race baiter. But yet, establishment evangelicals like Russell Moore, David French, and others would agree with Joy Reid, but they probably would not phrase it quite like Joy Reid did here on MSNBC. So again, should a Christian vote for Trump? I would say yes. As a Christian and as a Baptist preacher, I would say unequivocally yes. Now you say, why? What are my reasons? Well, let me give you 9 of them real quickly. Number 1, we now have a bona fide track record. What I did not know about Trump in 2016, having only known him as a rich billionaire and a guy that makes cameos in movies, I now have a 4-year track record, and I know what to expect going into this next term. So number 1, I have a bona fide track record. Number 2, Trump delivered on good Supreme Court judges. He took the list from the Heritage Foundation, and he actually acquiesced. Former Republican presidents did not do that. They made choices irrespective of the Heritage Foundation. Former President Trump actually delivered on some of those Supreme Court judges, 3 of them in particular, and I think most of them were all Heritage Foundation recommendees. Number 3, Roe versus Wade is history because of the Dobbs decision. Roe v. Wade is history. After 50 years of being a badly decided law under a bunch of Republican presidents who all claimed the pro-life mantra, it was under this boorish guy because of 3 Supreme Court justices that were confirmed and placed on the bench that Roe v. Wade is history. I'll give you another reason why. Israel's capital was recognized by moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. You know how many Republican presidents from Nixon on promised that one? And it got done under Donald J. Trump. What about this? The Abraham Accords that were put in place in the last year of Trump's presidency. The Abraham Accords that would have both stabilized the Middle East and kept Israel potentially out of the conflict with Hamas and Iran that's currently going on right now, and now enter the Houthis. And what about the stack of money going to Iran and the Biden administration saying, well, that was money we owed them anyway? You think all that stuff would have happened under former President Trump? I don't think so. I'll give you another reason why I'd vote for him. No global wars and no global conflicts during that 4 years. Not one. Not one. You say, why? Why wasn't there any global wars and why wasn't there any global conflicts? Because the dictators were scared to death about what Trump would do. I mean, the guy's a little, you just never know what he's going to do. How about this one? Another reason to vote for him. Christian ethics were at the forefront. Yeah, I know. That's one of the reasons why some of my Christian friends don't want to vote for him, because they think that the Christian ethics that were at the forefront during the 4 years of Trump's administration were not being pushed by Trump. No, they're actually being pushed by him. How about this one? Peace through strength, which is Reagan's mantra, and respect among world leaders. You think world leaders respect President Biden? The man is a rotting bag of oatmeal, folks. Why in the world would they respect him? The guy is shaking hands with ghosts. They lead him around, telling him how to get off a stage. And then I'll give you the last reason why I think you should vote for Trump. I personally felt safe and secure. You say, well, that's a personal reason. Yeah, well, these are all frankly personal, but there's policy behind this. Didn't you feel safer and more secure under former President Trump than you do with the guy that's currently in charge? Well, what about Trump's mean tweets and boorish language, Pastor Cook? Well, I want you to think about this. I'll take mean tweets and boorish language any day of the week against selling out our country or allowing parents to use their children as science experiments. Remember, folks, Trump was not supposed to happen in 2016, and they lost their minds. I'll give you my closing words on all this stuff here in just a minute here on your hometown station. We'll be back in just a second. All right, we're back here for our final segment here of Politics and the Pulpit here on your hometown station. This, of course, is the Bishop of Santa Clarita, Pastor Jerry Cook. And again, just a quick shameless plug. If you want to hear more of your illustrious host, you can listen to the Faith and Freedom Hour every Sunday at 8 a.m. right here on your hometown station. And you will get to hear Sunday morning sermons from yours truly. And I encourage you folks to, do whatever you guys do, but you're going to have to do it. Well, one last thing I wanted to talk about here about the upcoming 2024 election, which, of course, again, this is going to be one for the history books, folks. I was telling my congregation a couple of Sundays ago during our State of the Church sermon, which is something new that I've done this year. If you think it has been bad in the past, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is going to be one of the most you talk about vitriol, you talk about potential for violence, chaos in the streets, Molotov cocktails, you name it. This is going to be interesting, folks. If you're wanting something normal, I just don't know if you're gonna see that this year, and I think that you're gonna see things ratchet up in a more rhetorical way just as soon. Let's just imagine that Trump wins New Hampshire next Tuesday. He wins New Hampshire next Tuesday, and let's say he barely wins it. Do you know that the majority of Republicans usually come out of an Iowa win and do not win Iowa? For instance, George Bush from 2000, George Bush Jr., the son. He lost Iowa, and then, he won Iowa and lost New Hampshire. And that's usually what happens. That's the trend. Someone will win Iowa, but then they'll lose New Hampshire. Let's say that Trump totally destroys that narrative, wins Iowa the way he did, and then wins New Hampshire. You see, all of the establishment, both on the Democratic side, the Republican establishment, and the evangelical establishment, are all pushing in their chips for Nikki Haley next Tuesday in New Hampshire, because they think that Nikki Haley is able to then somehow reset the game if she either comes really close second to Trump or ends up maybe eking out a 1-point win. They really think that it's going to somehow change the trajectory. The problem with that is this: as soon as New Hampshire's done, the next primary is going to be South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was a 2-term governor. And do you know who's ahead in South Carolina right now? By like 35 points? Donald J. Trump. And then you know what happens after that? After South Carolina, then it's Nevada. Do you know who's ahead in Nevada? By like 40 points? Donald J. Trump. They're putting all of their chips into New Hampshire. And even if Trump wins New Hampshire by a point or 2 points, which of course they're going to spin that as a loss, but even if he wins it by 1 or 2 points, he would have broken the line of Republicans who came out of Iowa, winning Iowa, but then losing New Hampshire. And of course, there is another wonderful narrative that the former president can pick up on. I want to just give you one last thing. If you ever read Time Magazine, Time Magazine put out an article back in February of 2021 that was written by Molly Ball. I want you to look at it. They are going to censor this thing as we get closer and closer to the 2024 election. Trust me. The title of this Time article is called "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." Now, you wonder why a lot of us doubt the legitimacy of Joe Biden and the 2020 election. When you read from Time magazine this title: The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. And here is a almost 10 or 15,000 word article in Time magazine, printed for everybody to see how they rigged 2020 in order to get the outcome they wanted. Folks, they are outlining for you in this article exactly what they did in order to get the preferred outcome they wanted. Folks, I know some of you watched 2,000 Mules, and there may be some truth to that, and I'm not doubting that. There might have been some things happening nefariously with those drop boxes. I don't think you have to go that far. There's a great book written by Molly Hemingway called Rigged, and I'm just now reading it a second time through. If you've not read that book, you need to read it. It's called Rigged by Molly Hemingway. She, of course, is a Fox News contributor. I think she writes for the Heritage Foundation and is a senior fellow at one of these think tanks. But it is an excellent book. And basically, the fix for 2020 was in the day that Trump took the oath of office in January of 2017. They began the plan. And you can say what you want about conspiracies, you say, well, Pastor, you're putting on your tinfoil hat. Listen, when Trump delivered his 2020 February State of the Union, the one State of the Union where he honored Rush Limbaugh with that Lifetime Achievement Presidential Medal of Honor, and basically gave the double-barrel middle finger to all the Democrats and the Republican establishment by doing that, Trump was on top of the world, and he was going to coast to re-election, and the Democrats and the establishment in both parties knew it. There was only one thing that could stop that re-election from occurring, and that was a global pandemic. COVID happened to stop that win. They say, oh, preacher, there you go. You probably think that there were 3 shooters for JFK and all that stuff. Listen, all I can tell you is this. Trump was on his way to becoming a second-term president. And now he's going to do a Grover Cleveland, where he was in, then another guy came in, and now he's going to come in again. We shall see, but we are definitely in the thick of it. Next week, don't forget, Dr. Bill Grady will be here. If you are interested in Israel and all things happening there in the Middle East, you definitely want to listen to next week's show, as Dr. Bill Grady will be calling in, and we'll be talking about his book, Holy Ground, which is probably one of the most exhaustive books I've read on Israel. This is your holy host saying thanks for tuning into Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station.